This is the magicwordpodcast.com.
Oh, good day. Good day. Good day. Good day. How's it going?
Okay. Hello, this is Scott Wells for the magicwordpodcast.com. And yes, we are traveling north of the border here this week in order to talk with a friend that we normally just to see annually at the Elby's 4F convention, but we missed seeing him this year, so we visited him via Skype. But before we get into our conversation with Chris Pillsworth, I wanted to just give you a couple of quick messages. One is we are now into our fifth week of the Magicians Relief Project, and it continues to grow and to help several people. And I am thankful for those who have helped with their financial aid, and I know that the people who have been the recipients of that have been thankful as well. So just kind of giving you an update. Everything is continuing to go well. If you have the financial means to help, please drop me a note. That would be an email to Scott at The Magic Word Podcast, and I can tell you how that you can help supply some financial aid. We are getting to a point right now where that we're starting to get out into the world a little bit, but I don't think magicians are getting to that point where they're actually making the kind of money that they were before. I mean, it's going to be kind of slowly easing into that. So I think that this next 5 weeks will certainly help as well, at least 5 more magicians. And we have some other exciting news as the weeks progress as to some things that are happening kind of behind the scenes. It's been kind of exciting. Then next, I just wanted to thank Norman Beck, who continues to provide us with some jokes, a little levity during this time, and he has also really enjoyed doing this himself, and he has a suggestion, and that is that he would like to solicit your help for this. All you have to do is to drop an email to me, that's Scott at themagicwordpodcast.com, and give me a topic, any topic, and I will bring that up to Norm. And if you can stump him, if he can't come up with some sort of a joke on your specific topic, then he will send you a free copy of his lecture notes. And it's a great offer and costs you nothing. Just drop me an email. It'd be kind of fun. And it's got to be something that's going to be reasonable. I mean, it can't be some obtuse word that you happen to find in the dictionary. So just any subject, basically, and I'll bring it up to Norm, and we'll continue with a few jokes from week to week. So hopefully you're enjoying that. And so in that vein, let's just give a call to Norm today just to hear a few jokes.
Joke Hotline, how can we help?
You got something funny?
Well, what did you want to have to talk to these nice folks about? What subject was on your mind?
Well, obviously this is a podcast for magicians, so tell me, have you got anything that's funny for magicians or about magicians?
Well, that's a pretty tough subject, but I'll see what I can do.
Okay.
Did you know that with this coronavirus, what you would call a kid show magician that does balloon animals on stilts, that has a cell phone, a pager, and an answering service?
No. Wow. What would you call? I can't repeat all of that. That's a tough one. No. What would you call it?
An optimist.
He's ready for the calls anyway, whether it's on a beeper or.
That's right. And you know, Scott, what you would call in Texas a smart, sophisticated, articulate, rich kid show magician?
Rich, articulate kid show magician. No, I don't. What would you call it?
It's a myth. You know what you should say if you're ever at a magic convention and some good-looking, handsome, well-dressed man walks into a magic lecture 5 minutes late? You know what you should ask him?
Are you in the wrong place?
That's right. You got it. That's very good. You know, I was in class in college. I was actually talking to some people the other day about this COVID virus thing, and some of them said that they had started doing magic door to door.
Mm-hmm.
They would just go knock on the door and say, "We do magic," and and then just take whatever they could get, like they were busking on the street.
Yeah.
I thought I'd try it. So I started in Dallas, and I started working my way south, and I was down just south of Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And I come up to this ranch, and I knocked on the door, and the rancher came to the door, and he said, "How could I help?" And I said, "I'm the COVID-19 magician. I'm here to do magic." I said, "Would you like to see some?" And he said, "Well, yeah." He said, "Come on in." He said, "Could I get you a glass of tea?" And I said, "That'd be real nice." He said, "Now, what is it you wanted to show me?" I said, "Well, I'm not rightly sure. I never got this far before."
Good intent.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Scott, what I thought might be kind of fun is that we could do kind of a contest. We do this every week, and we could let people call in or send an email. And if they can stump me with a joke, I'll send them a free set of my lecture notes. It's like they get nothing for something.
It's nothing for something. Good idea. I think that if they would either send me a private message through Facebook if they're a friend, or perhaps on the Facebook page for the Magic Word Podcast, or send an email to scott@themagicwordpodcast.com with a subject that you want Norm to tell a joke or two or three about, and if you can stump him, then he will give you a free set of his lecture notes. That sounds like a good deal. Let's try that. See how that works out.
So I have one last joke for you on this subject. So there were two magicians, Dave Solomon and Michael Weber.
Mm-hmm.
Both were convicted of murder, and they were sentenced to die. And so on the day of their execution, the warden came to see both of them and said, "We have a policy here, just like your last meal, you get one last request. So whatever it is, if we can grant it, we will, because this is your last day." Dave Solomon said, "Well, I've been working on a 13-phase oil and water routine with Ed Marlowe's with some very snappy patterns that I wrote myself. And I'd like to perform it one time before I die." He said, "Okay, we can do that. That's very reasonable. That's not a problem." They asked Michael Weber, they said, "And what's your request?" He said, "Could you just kill me first?"
That's good. That's good.
And I wouldn't tell that if I weren't good friends with both of them.
I know that. That's right. Well, that's a good way to close. That's a good way to also introduce, hopefully, a new project here that people have got, again, a subject. All you have to do is just send a random subject of something that you would like to stump the jokester with this, and we'll call in with Norm.
Now, they can't pick some obscure word that nobody knows what it means. If that's not fair. They can't go like get in a dictionary and look up some really weird off the wall word that nobody's ever heard of, because that's no fun if I tell a joke and nobody else gets it.
Right. Makes sense. All right.
Okay.
Good parameters.
Well,
thanks again, Norm.
Thanks for the call. Talk to you later. Okay.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now. Thank you again, Norm. That was a lot of fun. And I hope the rest of you listeners enjoyed that then as well. And please send me your suggestions for topics that you'd like to try to stump the jokester in future weeks. Well, let's get to our main event, and that is our discussion with Chris Pillsworth out of Ottawa, Canada. I'm not going to say a whole lot about this other than I know that you're going to enjoy it, get a lot out of it. He's a very creative magician. I would also suggest that one of the things he talks about is the cactus and balloon, and there is a video of that, of him performing it on the blog. So if you go to themagicwordpodcast.com, you'll see that video, and it's pretty incredible. And he has other things that he does as well. But I think that if you're looking for some ideas or looking for ways to create and how to create, this is a good episode to listen to, because he's got a lot of suggestions, and he does a lot of consulting, and I just think this is wonderful. I'm glad I had a chance to actually sit down across Skype to talk with my friend Chris Pillsworth. So please welcome him this week here on The Magic Word. Today I have with me a friend from Ottawa, Canada, who is not only a magician but also a consultant to many other magicians, as well as a creator and performer, and he consults on shows and for helping to develop and create new ideas and new concepts, and has a wonderful background. A lot of things that I think you're going to enjoy hearing and learning from this gentleman. He's someone that I normally just see each year whenever I attend Obie's 4F convention out in New York, since it's not too far from Ottawa and he drops on down. So please welcome Mr. Chris Pillsworth. Hey there, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. It's so good to hear you and talk with you. You know, I want to say that I know you've been working with Rick Wilcox for a long time, and I was in his wonderful theater just a couple of years ago, and he had one of your creations over there, which is the one that continues to fool me, which is the one that's the cactus and the balloon idea, kind of a thing. Yeah. Fantastic, and I really enjoyed the show and, things he's doing with that. So we'll kind of get into, creation and kind of what you're doing. But as far as like consulting, had you known Rick for a long time, or how'd you get connected with him and helping him with his show?
I met a few people that I've consulted for through Factors as well. So I started coming to Factors, I think about maybe six or 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first year that I went, there'd been several other magicians from Ottawa that had been going. And one of them said, I think you'd really like this convention. That was Glenn Brown. And so I attended, but I always thought it was really a hardcore close-up convention, but it's morphed over the years a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I asked one of my friends, I said, well, what do you think I should do? And he said, well, I think the cactus trick would be a great one to show. And fortunately, the lineup was, for me, I was on, I think, Thursday or Friday, which was fantastic because it gave me a little bit of time just to see what it was all about. But then once I did that trick, it was like my calling card, like I'm somewhat under the radar as far as magic goes. However, everyone who saw that just came up to me and said, wow, that was just amazing and how much they liked it. Yeah. And it's almost like you let your work speak for itself, and then I didn't really need to prove to anyone the type of magic that I was doing and the creativity that I had. And so that's how I met Rick. And then I guess we had dinner one night and just got talking. And he invited me down to his theater just to see it. And so I I flew in on a weekend, and Gene Anderson went with me as well. And Rick had just purchased a new trick from Spain that he was having. It was a great trick, but he was having trouble setting it up in his theater. And so Rick and Gene and myself spent the whole weekend in his theater just like tweaking this thing. Yeah. And so that's kind of how Rick found out the skill set that I bring with all the design and all the performing as well. And we got that trick working really, really nicely. And so then after that, then he said, well, could I bring you in? So now for about the past 5 years, he flies me in for a week at a time, usually 1 week a year. In either October or November, because that's when his season is a bit slower. Mm-hmm. And the stuff that I do for him, I have tricks, like he's got other tricks in my show that I've given to him. And then we also work on repairing some things, creating some custom magic while I'm down there. And then there's certain things that, unless you were behind the scenes during the show, you wouldn't see. Like they have one where they have a fairly large prop. That when they close the front curtains and Rick is working in one, it needs to be moved out of the way. And for Susan, they had one person who left mid-season. And so she had this fairly large prop to take care of. And I designed this really neat method to allow that prop to be struck really quickly. Otherwise, they might have had to take the trick out of the show because the backstage setup and teardown wouldn't have been possible.
So she strikes that, or does Rick do that?
Nope, she strikes it while wow. Rick is doing it. I'm not going to say what the trick is,
sure.
Because but there are things that I designed just to, as with those type of shows and larger shows, anyone who's done those recognizes that there's the show that happens in front of the audience, and then there's the show that happens backstage as props are being moved around or prepared or those sort of things. So I'm able to come at their requirements from both sides, whether it's tricks or whether it's logistics.
Have you Did you ever get a chance to see Le Grand David show, Cesare Pelez show there in Beverly?
That's a show that I wish I'd been able to see. Unfortunately not, but I hear that it was just absolutely phenomenal.
It was, and the reason I'm bringing that up is just because of the size of their wings, basically, and how that they were gliding things in and out so effortlessly. But behind the scenes, I know that had to be just a logistical nightmare to be able to keep things flat and to strike, because they did big illusions and they had a lot of actors and not a lot of room.
Yeah. It's almost like that needs to be rehearsed at the same time that the show is being rehearsed.
Good point.
And every time that you put something new into the show, that will change up your backstage a little bit too if you're working with limited wing space. Fortunately, at Rick's Theater, he's got his workshop is just adjacent to, like, that becomes the wings, but everything comes in from stage right. There's really not much space at all stage left, so that sort of dictates how things work there.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind to me for people who are listening to this may have already attended Ray Anderson's show in Austin, Texas, which was Esther's Follies, and that perhaps is the ultimate in this, particularly that they have a stage, and so the front row, I mean, people can put their feet on the stage. I mean, it is that close, and behind them is a plate glass window that is open to 6th Street, I believe it is, so there are people walking back and forth, and they interact with them. So they do put a curtain back behind there occasionally, but again, that is something else. But then to stage left, there's nothing except there's a door, which it's like you can walk around the stage and you can exit, stage left over there. The point is there's no wing except to the right, and there's another building next to that one. So basically, it's kind of an L shape, if you will, so that whatever flats and props and things they bring out, that it comes from kind of as you go stage right, then you make a quick left, to go down up against this building to pull those flats out. But they also apparently have a fly that they can drop down, because when he is doing, and I'm talking about large illusions, I mean, he does water levitation, he does eclipse, where he has this huge thing that comes down. I've seen him do just big illusions, and I'm thinking, where are these things coming from? Just because there is absolutely no room. But you've got a very good point, Chris, that I hadn't thought about, particularly if you're a stage illusionist, is how that you have to choreograph not only with you and the actor, your other performers on stage, but also the manipulation of the props to be easily, transition from one to the next without it looking like you're fumbling.
Yeah. I remember with all the different shows, whether it's a big show or a small show, that it's kind of nice, actually. I think David Casero posted something just recently on Facebook talking about restrictions, putting restrictions on creating your magic. And I studied product design at university, got my degree in '86. That's going way back. But the thing was that usually a design of whatever you were given would be easier to accomplish if you were given more restrictions on the design, whether it might be budgetary considerations or manufacturing, and whether they were talking about, if you're talking about a cottage industry where you might be making 50 to 100 units, or whether it was mass produced where you're making 100,000. So just by virtue of the fact of the quantities, you would have different manufacturing methods. So you had to deal with all of those things. And I find that the more restrictions that you have, the easier it is to solve the problem. I mean, you still have to solve the problem, but that helps, because it means that you don't have an unlimited a number of choices to make with coming up with the solutions. And whether that's for illusion shows or whether it's for smaller shows, I think that holds true pretty well all the time, And so, like, I've done performing at outdoor festivals where people are surrounding you. So you'd think, well, a magic show, that's not really great, because now you have to really consider your angles. But if you just say, okay, I have to pick stuff that doesn't have any angle problems, then that limits your choices. And so that helps you to pick what you're going to decide to do. And so that's always, I think, helpful. Sometimes it feels a little bit daunting and intimidating when you go, oh, how am I going to accomplish that? But then when you get around to trying to think about possibilities, then you soon discover that there are opportunities that may not have existed in other situations that are more standard situations.
So you can apply one thing towards another, and perhaps a similar concept, obviously.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely.
Well, that has a lot to do, I think, even with, as you say, like some smaller shows, whether you're doing in one, if you're doing a parlor type of a show or a corporate thing for a group of executives, or even a birthday party, I guess, for that matter, as far as your prop management, but also for close-up, has to do with pocket management, and being able to flawlessly ease one thing out so you're not, saying, okay, well, let me see here, what am I going to do next? And you're kind of, feeling around and pulling things out of your pocket. I mean, as one thing is coming out, the other one should be going away, so it transitions flawlessly.
Yeah, and if you're being paid by the hour, you don't want to have to sub out 1 minute out of every set to reset. If you do 10 times, that's 10 minutes on the hour, which is not what that's not what you're being paid for. And if you're working at restaurants or at icebreakers or cocktail parties, then you're absolutely right with pocket management. And if you're thinking of putting a new trick in, then you sort of have to consider, well, where's that one going to fit? And I always consider these things, like even when you're doing a set list for a show, it's like a bunch of dominoes that you've set up. And if you have a show that's working well, then all the dominoes stay right side up. But if you put something in new, then you have to consider what's the impact of that new addition to the show on everything else, and will it knock other dominoes down, or is it something that can be put in and taken out on its own? And another person who's got the cactus trick, I've sold it to a few people, but the most recent person, so there's 3 of them worldwide, one with Daly in China, Tang Daly in China, and then Rick Wilcox, and then Matt King also has it, and that's just gone in the show fairly recently. But it was funny because when I flew down to Vegas to show him how to do it, and so I spent a few days with them. And when they were looking at it, he and his wife, when I was over at their place showing him how it was done, it was kind of like Mac's show is super tight, but he also is limited by the amount of time that he can do. I think it's 75 minutes. Maybe you can stretch it an extra 5, but he's got the meet and greet afterwards.
So whatever goes in, something has to come out.
Yeah, it was almost that way. So he just emailed me just a while back saying that he managed to figure out how to put it into the show. And the first time that he put it in the show at Harrah's, the evening show was switching over, and so they for a couple of weeks he had to move into a smaller space, and the tent illusion that he does wouldn't fit into that space. So that was when he first started putting the cactus in. And then once they moved back into the regular space, I think it took them a little bit of time just to figure out how they could gain a little bit of time to put it in. And the presentation was fairly short, so it wasn't like, having to swap out one complete routine, like a 10-minute routine, for another one. But he's got that in there now. And so, even shows like that, every show has those considerations that are required. Birthday parties. You've got to be you don't want to be going back and forth to your car all the time to pick up more stuff. And you also don't necessarily have a ton of room to work with if you're in a smaller home, where you got the kids sitting down. So, those are considerations, and you sort of discover those as you move into these different markets. Yeah.
And I want to circle back to that when we talk a little bit later about busking also, that you're an expert in then as well. But I do want to go back to, since we have been kind of dancing around this trick, can you explain the presentation or the effect? I mean, when they're saying the cactus and the balloon, that people are going, what? Wait. So
Sure. The basic effect is that I have a cardboard box, and I reach inside the cardboard box and I pull out a cactus, which is planted in a terracotta pot. So it stands about maybe 18 inches high, and I put that into the box. And then I have a second box, which inside that box has a large clear balloon, which is about a 20 inch balloon that's clear. That gets put into the second box. The second box is slightly larger than the one with the cactus in it. So I pick up the box with the balloon and I invert it and I push it down over top of the box with the cactus. And when I lift both boxes away from the table, sitting on the table is the balloon, and inside the balloon is the cactus that you just saw moments ago.
Right. Yeah. It is the most visually jaw-dropping thing I have seen magic-wise in so many years, and I want to say mostly in my lifetime. I mean, it's just there's no way. And as you say, whenever that you had first done that, like at 4F convention, that everyone else's jaws drop, and immediately it's like you don't have to prove yourself anymore. That
it was sweet.
It does it, yeah. And I would think that's got to be just a highlight, certainly in the shows of the three gentlemen that you had mentioned, then as well. That's just a great. How do you go about in that particular case of what is your muse? I mean, what is it that as I remember, they had to be like with teddy bears in the balloon type of a thing, years ago. But what was it that kind of sparked your imagination to make you think of that and other kinds of things? How do you create?
That's a great question. When I'm putting stuff together, I'm usually always just on the lookout for just unusual and unique things. And coming from a design background, even though I haven't worked professionally as an industrial designer, I like to see new things and cutting edge things, and sort of they end up being filed away either like Pinterest is a great resource for getting visual ideas.
Good idea.
In the case of the Cactus, I remember I picked up a magazine, which was Esquire magazine, and this was going back quite a few years because that Cactus has been part of my repertoire since the late 80s. And the Esquire magazine had a cover of Steve Martin, the comedian and movie actor. And I picked up the magazine, and they had their staff photographer take several photographs for the article, so the cover and then also in the article itself. And one of the photographs had Steve Martin in a suit, and cradling in one arm he had a red balloon, and cradled in the other arm he had a cactus planted in a terracotta pot. And I had made up these forms for my ideas that I kept in a binder, and I'd segregate them based on if it was stage material, if it was illusions, or if it was close-up ideas. And I would when I got an idea for a trick, I'd fill out those forms just so I'd have that as reference material. And for that particular one, I looked at it and I go, that's a great photograph, because photographs are still shots, but that one sort of told a complete story in one picture. And I don't know how much longer after I'd seen that I considered, wouldn't it be cool to put a cactus inside a balloon? And so I was thinking about that, but at the time it's like, well, that's a great idea, but how the heck do you
Sure.
do that?
Sure.
And so piece by piece, sort of little elements came, it wasn't like to try to solve the whole trick as one. It was a series of solving a bunch of smaller problems that once you solve those ones, and at the end of that, then you would end up with a particular trick which was really solid. So I remember at Christmas time, 1 year not too long after that, I was walking in the mall and they had a kiosk, and one of the things in there gave me an idea about how to achieve something. And then I have some friends who are puppeteers, and so some of their skill sets helped out with that. So it was just a matter of creating all these little mini solutions that ultimately would create this mega illusion. And since then, the trick has been evolving as well. It's gone through about 7 or 8 different editions. So each time I would look at one particular part. Like one time, for example, there was the reset time on it wasn't like completely fast, but I was hired at a hot air balloon festival, which took place over a long weekend. And they hired myself and another magician to do 34 shows in 3.5 days. And so the form of the show was that both of us would do 15 minutes, and then they would kick the people out of the tent that had bleachers in it. And then 10 minutes later, they'd bring in the next group of people. And they said that they wanted the Cactus to be part of that show. And so I thought, I'm not going to be able to reset that in that
quickly.
That quickly. So I had to consider how I could change the part that took the time to reset and see if I could figure out a faster way. And so that created a new way of doing it, which is now in the show. So sometimes it's like necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention. But the thing was that I think that you try to make the trick as good as possible when you're creating something new, but I don't think it needs to be absolutely perfect. I think it needs to be pretty good. And then as you're presenting it and performing it, you'll make new discoveries about how you can make those improvements. And I've just been rereading Tommy Wonder's Books of Wonder, which are also fabulous. And I could tell he was that way as well. The watch and clock trick, he put in 3 versions in volume 2. So he was always considering how can I make this better? How can I make it truer to the original idea?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you're coming up with ideas, first thing is to write it down so you don't forget the idea. And then the second thing is just to begin to identify if there are other portions of solutions, maybe from other tricks which apply to that, like to try and do as much research as possible so you're not reinventing the wheel.
Right.
And then from there, just start to put those little pieces together. And I usually have quite a few projects on the go. So if I run into a stumbling block on one, then I'll set it aside because I know my brain is subconsciously considering the options. And then when I get an idea, I'll come back to it again. And even if it's just like a fragment of an idea, like I pay more attention to that now. If it's just like a little fragment of an idea, I'll try to do a quick test, maybe with a mock-up or something like that, to see if it's worth exploring more. Like today, for example, I was stapling a piece of web strapping to another thing to see if that would work. And I just made up a quick one, and it looks like it's going to be promising, and that will solve not a huge problem in this trick that I'm working on, but it will solve a significant problem, like one that may have led to a solution. So I'm trying to, plug those holes all the way along.
That makes sense, and I think that you do need to make some sort of a little mock-up like that. It reminds me of Walter Blaney before, that he had developed his ladder suspension, that he had a smaller mock-up where he had like a little Barbie doll, basically size of an assistant, but he had the board and the little ladders and everything else that he had developed that he could actually literally put in a shoebox. And he's presented that for me several times, where he pulled this out and say, "Look, here's the original, here was the idea," as he would kind of fiddle with that, and then you can kind of build the full size, from that as well. So I think it's important, that you do have some sort of a little mock-up that you kind of are playing with to see how that works. But something that you had said I want to go back and touch on too, that is an additional thing, is to never stop thinking, as that most magicians tend to think, okay, it's finished, I'm done, and we'll work on another thing. I'm reminded of another Canadian there, Sean Farquhar, in which that whenever I remember hearing a lecture of his one time in which he had some poker chips, and he said, here is a trick you can do with that, and here's another trick, and he went on like 7 or 8 or 10 different ideas with these same chips. So if you didn't like one idea, you might like the next. But the point is that he was continuing to always think about what else you could do. Not that he was trying to come with all these ideas to try and sell this, because again, if you don't like this routine, you might like this that would fit for you. I just think that he was just a wealth of creativity and thinking, continuing to think. And that's what, when I've talked with some other magicians, that some advice has been to don't stop creating, don't stop thinking, to continue to work on that. And a lot of times, most times, in the lecture notes that magicians sell, they'll say, well, there are some other things that are not in the notes, and let me just show you this because I have been working on this since then. And that's because it's always constantly evolving. And, I had a conversation with Michael Goddard, who is an artist, and we talked about that very thing, about when he finishes a painting that's going to go on someone's wall or in a gallery or wherever, somewhere in the world, that there's not much more he can do. When once you put that final touch on it, you can't go back and fiddle with it, as opposed to a live performer who is always kind of evolving and working on a line or a move or something, regardless of how tight, let's say, Matt King's performance is. I'm sure there are some things that he's just as adding, your trick, he's continuing to add that. If you are an artist, a sculptor or a painter or something like that, when you're done, you're pretty much done. I mean, as he says, I'll go back and look at something, and he's thinking, if I could take a paintbrush, I'd like to do one more thing to that, but he can't touch it again, basically, unlike us, So it's important, I think, in our case, to continue to work on it and to keep thinking.
The thing that's challenging about magic as a performance art is that generally speaking, you don't get any credit if you partly fooled someone. I mean, it's usually binary. It's black or white, right? You either fool them, or you didn't fool them. I mean, you might have partly fooled them, but as far as they're concerned, you didn't.
Right.
And as a result of that, I think performers tend to gravitate towards tricks that they see for sale because there's an implicit insurance with that the trick will work and you won't be embarrassed and won't have your ego bruised because it's succeeded with someone else, which means that you know, it's tough enough putting something new into a show, but if you know that someone else has succeeded with it, then you go, okay, that's my guarantee.
That's why I think there are more magicians than mentalists, because in mentalists and mind readers that you actually have to talk through something, you know, and you're having to work on your performance and what you're saying and not rely on the prop working or the thread not breaking or something, you know, where a mentalism, you know, you could be walking a line and it's like if somebody says no to this, then okay, well, I have to go a different direction. It's more of jazz kind of thing than magic is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but
no, that's a good tangent. That's a good tangent. But what I was getting at was that the people who create, so when I put together a trick and I'm working on something new, I don't necessarily think that's the end of it ever.
Right.
Whereas if you buy a trick, you think, oh, that's it because the inventor got to the end of that one and there's nothing more to do with it.
There's a solution, right?
Yeah, and so. Like, for example, with my version of cardiographic, that's like about the 7th version of cardiographic. Like, all of them have had different premises. And so I took something where there was droodles, which are these unusual drawings. And I think I posted it up on YouTube, too, from when I was working at the castle. And I really liked that trick a lot. But, like, that was probably over 10 years where it changed like about, 5 or 6 times because it's sort of like you're working on something and you're a little bit dissatisfied with it. So you try to identify what it is about that particular presentation, the trick that you don't like, and see if you can come up with some solutions to that. And I've written a set of notes which is called Made to Measure Magic. And that's how sometimes you'll see a trick that you really like, but there might be a few things about it that don't fit your personality, don't fit your character, maybe whatever the problems are. And I give some ideas about how to go about taking what you like and modifying what you don't like, so that basically you're tailoring a trick to yourself. And so when you're in that inventor mode, then you say, okay, yeah, I bought this trick, but that doesn't mean that I can't go about changing it. And one of the things that's been really reassuring is that the egg bag that I put out with Bill Abbott, which is called PB&E, and that's an acronym for paper bag and egg. We've sold probably about 1,500 of those worldwide. And it's been really, really cool to hear people email back and say how they've taken that trick and how they've modified it to fit into their own routines, or they've decorated it a little differently. And that gives me a lot of satisfaction knowing that other people are using that as their start point and running with it.
Right.
And I think that's really good. I think, even if you change the premise or the presentation, that still shows that you're concerned about making that magic fit yourself. And, not everyone's an inventor, but if you can find a way to make the magic support who you are on stage, and help to allow you to express your ideas, then I think that's fantastic.
Now, you'd done some things also, I guess, in helping to do some stage design. Is that right, in China or Japan, or where were you?
When I was I was in China for 17 weeks, spaced out over 6 months in 2017, and that was my friend Gailey who recommended me to the production team as one of the consultants. So this was a 12-part series, multi-million-dollar show, and there was several consultants. There was myself, there was Rory Adams from Britain. From the States, there was Kayla Morelli. Blake Voigt was there for a little bit. Patrick Kuhn, Chris Mitchell. And then there was also Magura that's a stage name from Japan. And so we were the principal consultants to create ideas for the top Chinese performers in that show. So we were there at the beginning of January of 2017 when they flew in all these top Chinese magicians to audition for the show. And then once that had happened, then they began to ask for ideas. So the first 6 episodes were taking those top Chinese magicians. They would compete head to head and narrow it down to a team of 5. And in the remaining episodes, that Chinese team competed against international teams. And so at the end, then they voted on, and they had people voting in. So it's a little bit like America's Got Talent format. But they wanted to have world-class magic, and China's great, but it's not the cutting edge type of magic that they were looking for. So every day we would go to the office, and we would just be pitching ideas. So we'd come up with ideas, we'd come up with premises, then we'd figure out methodology for that, and then from there, then we'd gather a cluster of routines together, and we would pitch them to the producers. And in that process, because of my background in design, I created storyboards for all of the tricks that we pitched. So I made probably about, 60 storyboards of a couple pages each, sort of cartoon format, so that they could get a sense. And then we scanned all of those, put it into a PowerPoint presentation, and made the pitch. And so that was a really incredible experience. But
so once you came up with these ideas, then they had the magicians already to come in, and you were teaching the magicians how to do the ideas that they were performing on TV then?
Yeah, that was the That's
they didn't want Americans coming in and performing. They wanted the Chinese to perform. Apparently.
So the first 6 episodes was just the Chinese performers who would present, and so we created magic for them as well to compete against each other. And then they also brought in some of their own magic as well that was fine-tuned for some of the episodes as well. And so that was a really amazing experience. And that was a case where, they had, in the beginning, they had pretty well unlimited budget in a sense. So that made it a little bit more challenging. And they hadn't really put together a show like that before. So it was almost like everyone was learning, from the production team to the consultants and everyone else. So, and not only that, we were in China, so they had translators. And I figure that the translation probably added about another 30% to our meeting times because it had to go back and forth. And the guy who was from Japan, Magura, he didn't really speak much English. So his translator was a Japanese translator. And then if he was saying something, then it would have to go to like a Japanese English translator, so.
It's interesting that you say that it was challenging because you had an unlimited budget. I would think just the opposite, that if you had a limited budget, it's like, well, there are things we can do, but we're constrained by the budget. I would just think that, it's like, okay, well, if the world is your oyster without any ceiling on how much you want to spend in the budget, then I think that's like, okay, well, we're going to bring in this tractor or whatever,
Yeah, it was, I think if you're heavy duty into that situation, you'd find that having a more limited budget would actually be better, because the thing was that, it tended sometimes in China, I think part of the cultural way is that they don't like saying no. So we'd pitch ideas, and then it might be, they would be pinned up on the board, and we'd come back maybe a couple weeks later and it'd be off the board. They didn't like to say no to an idea. And it would have been faster if they'd just say, no, I don't think that's going to work. That would give us time to work on new ideas. And every single idea that we pitched would take maybe 2 to 3 days of all of us just greenlighting ideas and then figuring out how to make it happen and have something that we felt was appropriate for the performers that they'd chosen. And so that made it a bit challenging. But what ultimately happened was that if you keep pushing those decisions down the road, then ultimately the show has to start to happen. And under those circumstances, it would have been better if ideas which were maybe technically not quite as challenging had been made more quickly, because all the props needed to be made, whether it was close-up props or whether it was stage illusions, and give the performers a lengthier period of time to rehearse and explore with those props, so that performance-wise they would have been you can take any trick you want as long as it's a reasonably good trick. And if you give a performer more time with that to explore and make it their own, then you'll find that you'll get something that's really pristine, that's really well done, versus something that might be technically a more complicated trick to work with where you're not given as much time. And that can end up being a little bit muddy in terms of the overall impact that it makes. And Darcy Oak was on Britain's Got Talent, and he did some illusions which were like, he did a version of the sub-trunk with a crystal case, and he also did a Dakota chair on a platform. And both of those tricks are pretty straightforward, like nothing really earth-shattering in terms of illusions, but the presentation was really well done. It was really well tailored to his character and persona, and the overall impact was like fantastic. So there's a case where, if we had maybe been able to follow that model a little bit more effectively, then some of the material on that show might have been stronger. But then again, we're not the only ones making decisions under those circumstances. As a consultant, you ultimately have to please whoever is your benefactor.
Producer, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, in some instances, for the Chinese show, they wanted performers who were younger and more telegenic because they felt that would draw in viewers. So some of the choices for those individuals were technically very poor. But you still have to work around that as a consultant. That becomes your limiting factor. Well, this has to be almost self-working because otherwise they're not going to be able to accomplish anything.
Right.
And so those are some of the issues that you deal with as a consultant. When I'm working for Rick and Susan Wilcox, they each have their own viewpoints. And I recognize too that it's both of their shows. So in some instances, Susan or Rick would come up and say, I don't like that because, but the other one did like the idea. And it was my responsibility to go back to the drawing board, whether it was creating a script for them, to get to the point where both of them liked what I had put together, because there's no point in a two-person show like that of having one person love a trick and one person hating it. That comes across to the audience as well. So and that's what made it a little bit challenging in China too, because we came up with some really good ideas, but the head honcho, he was like a magic aficionado and he wanted like the ultimate. So he would start muddling with our ideas and just muddying them up a little bit. And that made it a bit challenging too.
Was he a magician at all, or he thought?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
It does make it difficult whenever the person who is in charge, particularly the purse strings, and you're bringing them some ideas, and then they think that they've got a better idea when they have no knowledge or information about what they're talking about, really.
As performers, I mean, the more you perform, the more you get a sense of what will play and what won't play, sure, and what's sort of like not really an important addition to whatever you're creating, and what are those elements of that creation? What are those moments which will take it from being good to great? And and if you're not involved in that performing experience, then you may have alternate ideas about what will take something from good to great that you think in your mind will play well, but in actual fact don't play well at all. They actually make it worse. So
Right. Did you also design the set as well, or
no? We were just involved with concepts, some of the performance elements of it. And in some instances too, like when we were talking to the production designers, so when the illusions were created, the guy who was responsible for translating concept into illusions was Mark Parker, who's a Brit expat who's based in Singapore. He's put out some illusion books, and so he's really gifted in terms of being able to come up with illusion designs quickly. And then the builder in China, Wei Don, was excellent as well. He would be able to translate those drawings and designs into the real props. And so it was a case where we were working so quickly that the designs couldn't be like dimensioned out specifically. Like there would be overall dimensions, and then it would be left to the builder to create the final product from those drawings.
I know that you worked with Paul Keeve on Matilda in London, also on West End. Some of the illusions there.
We didn't actually work with him when the show was being in pre-production, and the producers were looking for different possible consultants. Daly was one who recommended several people to explore. And so when they were talking to me, so this would have been November in 2016, they wanted to meet with me, and they were going to plan on either meeting with some people in Vegas or some people in Britain, in London. And so they emailed me on Sunday saying, we're going to fly you on Wednesday, the following Wednesday. It's either going to be to Vegas or it's going to be to London. We're not sure what. And so then I think it was Monday that they told me, and they had a ticket for me. So it was easier for me to fly in to there to meet them than it was for them to come to Ottawa.
Mm-hmm,
and
sure.
So we met with Paul Keeve, who has done some exceptional work on some of the West End shows and musicals. He didn't end up being part of the team. And then we also met with Dynamo's manager, and then he provided them with some additional people to meet. And I had to leave on the Sunday, so they had a few more meetings on the Monday. So I didn't see who else they met, but Dynamo's manager provided some names. And then ultimately Rory Adams came in from Britain, and he wasn't there for the whole time, but he'd worked on a lot of shows, like with Dynamo and a few other people, and he's a great thinker, and also a guy who's really good in terms of practicalities as well. Like, he's not someone who would come up with just pipe dreams and say, this is it, and
right.
How's it done? I don't know. It's like you'd have.
I remember hearing about someone who had worked on Chris Angel's team, and he had a lot of great ideas. You can do this, or how about if you walk up the side of this building? Or, okay, well, how do you do that? Well, I'm not sure. I'm just an idea guy. Well, there's got to be more than that. I mean, a lot of people have good concepts, but to be able to bring those to the drawing board with a solution, is special talent.
Yeah, you're not really a good consultant if you're just coming up with these ideas, because those are really a dime a dozen.
Sure.
Caleb Morelli, when he was over in China, he was great too, in the sense that he said, that's exactly what he was saying. As a consultant, you're worthless if you just bring, these pie in the sky ideas. You need to be able to come back with real world situations about how to make that happen, and how to make that happen based on the person that you're consulting for, what medium they're working in. So earlier on, we were talking about close-up, and if you're going from table to table, that you've got a certain amount of pocket space and pocket management. But if your prime market is on Instagram, then basically you can use stuff that's really not angle proof at all,
right.
Because the eye of the camera, everyone looks.
It's a one-dimensional plane.
Through one point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's a situation, then that enables creators to come up with ideas that might be completely impractical for a live performing situation, but perfectly acceptable and more than acceptable in an Instagram or YouTube medium.
Right. Well, now that we're on this, that brings me to a perfect time to ask about busking, because I know that you did, or may still do, just a lot of street performing and busking kind of a thing. And are you still doing that? I remember, is that kind of how you got started?
No, not at all. Actually, it was about maybe 10 years ago that I started to go out on the street because at that time I'd been doing some illusion shows, and I wanted to sort of be a big star, and I could see that wasn't happening. I'd spent a long time. I've been doing magic full time since university, so since 87. And I put together some touring illusion shows, like a magic play called Disappearing Nightly. Mm-hmm. And I realized that that wasn't going to happen, and I'd put everything into it that I could. But I didn't, at that point I felt that I needed a change. So I sold my workshop. I had a 1,000 square foot workshop where all my illusions and the sets for the shows were. And then I got rid of a lot of the big stuff. The show transitioned to just being myself, so stand-up comedy with great magic. Mm-hmm. And I was a bit depressed after, like, sort of forfeiting that, the dream, like being Henning.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to come up with some new challenges to sort of figure out, well, I'm still not that old, so give yourself some new things to look into. So I can recall here in Ottawa, we have a busker festival every summer that goes over a long weekend, so 4 days. And I always go to that because they have great sort of variety performers. And I always loved how they could make an audience of about 300 or 400 people and get them in the palm of their hand who are complete strangers.
Wow.
And be able to make an awesome show. And so I thought, well, maybe I'd like to give busking a try a little bit. So in the summertime, I would go down to a pedestrian street that we have downtown and just start trying to learn how this busking format or busking medium goes. And so I've been doing that for about 10 years, and I do that in between regular shows. And what I've discovered from that, which has been really fantastic, is the busking show makes really apparent if you're not entertaining people. Because
immediately, right? You get that immediately feedback because they're either walking away or they're...
If your audience is growing, you're doing well. And if it's shrinking or it's not getting anywhere, then you're doing something wrong. But you can see that on a moment by moment basis. Like it's really evident. Like I can recall when I first started, I didn't have a complete set list. I had like where I'd start, where I'd finish, and then the middle could vary a bit. And I'd have music with some of those pieces. So on my iPod, I'd have my playlist, but I could sort of scroll around a little bit. And I can recall just looking over at my iPod to scroll to a new song. And when I look back up again, it was just like, just as long as it's taken to describe that, 4 people were walking away. Like
wow.
they were just like so impatient that like just a pause like of 2 seconds was enough to let them go. And I go, this is not good.
Well, talk about short attention span, really.
Well, the thing is, though, that the benefit of that is that when you start to figure out, it's like every performer says, every moment counts. Like in Steve Martin's biography, Born Standing Up, he said that he would audio record his shows so that you could listen to it moment by moment to see how things were working. And I was listening to another podcast recently. I remember John Archer. He was saying his acronym was FIRE. Your show needs to be on fire. It has to be, I'm going to try and remember what they...
I know that FIRE was an acronym. I believe he had that in his Penguin lecture, in fact.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Funny, interesting, relevant, entertaining. Mm-hmm. And if whatever you have in your show moment by moment doesn't contribute to one of those 4, then it needs to either be jettisoned, you have to get rid of that spot, or it has to be modified so it does fall into one of those 4 categories. And so that's what busking does as well. You can visually see if you're holding people with what you're doing, and it doesn't need to be magic all the time, but if you got some funny moments, if you've got some drama, like for example, one trick that I've been doing for a long time is the hydrostatic glass, where you pour water into a clear glass, you put a piece of paper over top of it, invert it, and then you pull the piece of paper away and the water sticks in the glass.
Right.
So sometimes when I'm looking for new material, that one in particular, I thought that's a good trick because I had read about Tommy Wonder doing that trick. It's in John Booth's book, Marvels of Mystery. It was in Fawcett Ross's book, and it was also in Alan Shaxson's book. So there's 4 magicians from 4 completely different time frames, like different countries, and they all thought it was a good trick. And I go, okay, so that's a pretty good endorsement right there. So I started off by making a Tommy Wonder gimmick, which was good, but I made some improvements to it. I'm not going to say what it is, but sure. I made some improvements to it. And then so I started doing that. And I can recall a friend of mine who was this guy who makes balloons. He was working out on the street too. And there was another magician who was from Montreal who was watching my show. And he didn't know that I was friends with the balloon guy, but he was talking to the balloon guy and saying that the hydrostatic glass wasn't very good. And so my friend came up to me afterwards and said, this guy didn't think it was good. And I go, And I had been doing it for a long time. I mean, it wasn't that I was technically doing it poor, but just that it wasn't good. And so I had always had the idea of doing the trick where before I pulled the piece of paper away from the glass while it was upside down, that I would hold the glass over someone's head.
Yes. Okay.
And then I'd pull
a little
away.
jeopardy to it.
Yeah. So now there's consequences. And so I was really frightened of doing that because, if it doesn't work properly, you're gonna get the guy all wet. But I started doing it, and it's turned into a really solid piece in the show. It's like about 10 minutes. And, there's some performers that say, oh, this trick is fantastic. I can do 10 minutes with this.
Yeah. And
sometimes it's a little bit of BS, because you watch them do it and you go, well, you could trim out about 5 minutes and it would be better,
Right.
But this one worked in the opposite way. Like out on the street, it gets longer because it builds. It's like you discover new bits and pieces and moments and funny gags and things like that, that get added in, because when you're working on the street, what that enables you to achieve is that I remember talking to Bill Malone, because I went to Bob Bitch's magic workshops for quite a few times. And Bill Malone said it's always tough putting new material into the show because you got your A material, and anything new that you put in, no matter how well you practice it, is going to be B, like a B material. And so, and when you're hired to do a professional job. So you don't want to be experimenting too much when you're trying to deliver your top-notch product. But out on the street, no one's paid before the end of the show. So it offers a lot of freedom to be able to discover and explore. And if you've got an idea for a line or a gag or a bit that just pops into your head, then you can immediately say it without worrying about if that's going to negatively impact that trick or that show. And so it means that in terms of being able to rapid prototype or improve a trick, that it's a really great spot to do so, because the amount of repetitions that you get over the day is more than you would if you're just paid to be doing shows. And if something worked well, in another 20 minutes you can try it again. So you're not forgetting things. Like if it was like a week between shows and you came up with a funny bit, then maybe by the following week you might have forgotten that. But on the street, it's like 10 or 15 minutes and away you go again,
Right. Well, listen, as we wrap up here, one thing I want to ask about that it just occurred to me then also when you were talking about the picture that you saw with Steve Martin holding that. Did you ever contact him and send him a video and say, hey, look, because he's a magician also?
Yeah, I was thinking of doing that.
You never did follow up?
No, I didn't. I should probably do that. I think he's a member of the Magic Castle, isn't he?
I believe so, yeah. I believe he's performed on stage there, too.
Oh, cool. Well, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should contact Jack and see if I can get Steve's email or whatever. And
Yeah, that he also consults. It seems like I saw something was on Facebook or Instagram in which he gives private lessons and, coaching and that kind of a thing then too. So he's accessible, for that. So yeah, talk to Jack. I think that might be a good way of trying to get to him. Well, the name of my podcast is called The Magic Word, and I'm always curious then to find out what is it that is your philosophy. What is it that is important to you? So, not necessarily what is your magic word, meaning like abracadabra, but what would be your word or phrase? What do you live by? What's your philosophy?
Yeah, that's hard to sort of distill down to.
What do you believe in? What makes you gives you energy to wake up in the morning?
Well, what I love about magic is that I care about it very deeply in terms of making good magic, but making good entertaining magic as well. I never want the magic to be second or subservient to anything else. But I want people to watch it as well. And so I think I always strive to make it better and to bring it closer to what it would be if it were really happening. And then another philosophy that I have as I've grown older, which isn't really about what I get from magic, but I can recall when I was starting off, I mean, I got started by looking at books from the library, and I can remember making some equipment. I was about like 11, and I'd get books like Bill Severn's books, which are always
Sure.
at the libraries, and make up the stuff. I was always making my own magic and reading books. And then there was people that helped me when I first got started, even before I could join the club here in Ottawa. And I think that as I've gotten older, as we accumulate knowledge, I think it's really important. I think magic is like a well, a water well, and that when we're starting off, when we don't have any knowledge whatsoever, that we look to others who have gone before us to try and gain from their experience, much the same way these podcasts are happening. And so as young people, or whenever you get into magic, you draw from the well. That's your knowledge is acquired by drawing from the well. And as we get older and we've acquired knowledge, I think in order to keep the art form improving and moving forward, that it's our responsibility to replenish the well, to put our knowledge back into the well, so that the well never runs dry, and the water that nourishes new people is constantly being refreshed and improved upon. And I guess you could say that's a philosophy that
Sure.
that I think that it's a case where anyone who does magic, I think we're very fortunate in that the art form is really unique, and it provides something that no other art form really can achieve. And I want it to keep growing, and so this is a way of sort of giving back. And that's even a case where I have some people who contact me and provide me with video, and I'll break it down for them and provide them with guidance as part of the consulting services that I do. And it's just a matter of, like it comes from the love of magic and the love of the art form as well.
I like that. So keep refreshing the well, basically. Well, just again, as I'm going to close right now, but if people want to get in touch with you to find out how that you can help and consult for their show, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can just go to my website, one of my websites, which is chrispillsworth.com. And so they can, there's a consulting section there, video endorsement from Rick Wilcox, some photographs from China, and then Mac's endorsement as well, Mac King. So that's how they can get in touch with me, and that's the best way. So just chrispillsworth.com.
Good. Perfect. Chris, thanks very much for your time. I appreciate this a lot. It's a lot to think about, and I can tell that magic is important to you, and you're a deep thinker and a very creative genius. So thanks for what you have created, and I know that there's going to be more to come from you as well.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's a pleasure.
As always. So with the Magic Word Podcast from Ottawa, that was Chris Pillsworth. This is Scotty out. Well, thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate you being my guest here this week on the Magic Word Podcast. A lot of really good and enlightening ideas that you had there, and it's always good to hear how a pro earns a living, and you're doing some great work out there. Well, I want to remind everybody to, if you haven't done this already, to make sure, first of all, of course, we were talking earlier about sending in some ideas of how you can stump the joke master. So if you've got some idea that you would like to have turned into a joke, be sure to send that over to me. So this way Norm Beck is going to be able to make a joke. And then also sign up for the pod letter. If you go to the magicwordpodcast.com, there you can sign up for that. And we'll have some upcoming contests with some guests that we have coming soon. And so you'll be the first to know about those when you are a subscriber to that pod letter. And also that if you are buying things on Amazon, be sure to go to the bottom of each page of the Magic Word Podcast, and there is a banner for Amazon affiliate. If you click on that, that'll take you to your Amazon page, and that way whenever you buy something, then we get a little love back in return. So don't forget to help us out as you can. If you cannot send us some financial aid at this time, then you can always help us out by just buying something through Amazon then too. So don't forget to click on that. And then if you've got some time, then you might right now, then be sure to go over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating, and give us some, if you got some positive comments that you can make about this, that'd be absolutely helpful. And if you're not on iTunes, I'm sure that wherever you listen to your podcast, however that you get these, that they have a platform also where you can leave comments then as well. So we've got a lot of really great episodes coming up in future weeks, so stay tuned, and you can find out about those again on our weekly pod letter once you have subscribed. So until next week, stay well, get booked, and remember to have a passion for magic and keep filling that well, so the thirst for magic will be quenched by others. This is Scotty out.